Welcome, everybody, once again to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, one last episode about The Bear, Season 3, a conversation I just recently had with Sona. She's caught up, so stay tuned for that conversation. Also, I want to call out, in case you don't make it to the end of the episode, I do recommend Perfect Days, a film that I thought of as I was watching this third season of The Bear. That's towards the very end of the episode. If you don't make it all the way there, just want to call it out here. It's available on Hulu currently, and thematically has a lot of interesting overlap with The Bear. Later this week, Sona and I will be discussing Presumed Innocent, the Scott Turow novel adaptation from Apple TV Plus, which is now past the midpoint of the season. Still very entertaining, although probably not living up to the promise of its brilliant first couple of episodes. Stay tuned for that conversation later this week. And if you want to get even more reviews from me as well, check out my Letterboxd profile, linked in the show notes, where I've been publishing a lot of reviews. I'm trying to do one a day, so not quite keeping that pace, but if you want to get a lot more reviews from me, check out that profile. And of course, as usual, reach out to us, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. We love hearing your feedback. So enjoy your holiday weekend. Stay tuned for that additional content, and let's get into that conversation. All right, Sona. So last time we talked, you had just seen Inside Out 2, and this very day that we're recording this, it has cracked $1 billion worldwide at the box office. It's the fastest
Amazing
for an animated movie ever, which is really bizarre for me. I got to say, even the popularity of the first Inside Out movie, when I first saw it, I'm like, this got great reviews, but I think Pixar's leaning even more so into making movies for parents rather than for the kids. Are the kids really going to love this? And that first one was a huge success, but this one's even exceeded the success of that one. And then there was a lot of naysaying. Pixar really damaged their brand by putting their movies on Disney Plus first, and they seem to be struggling to get people back into the movie theaters. So they were a lot of people thinking this one's not going to do as well as the first one. And that first one was really for parents anyway. Little kids are not going to want to see this. And I guess everybody was wrong, as usual, when it comes to these type of prognosticate, because it's a huge success. Anyway, my question to you, Sona, is do you plan to keep the box office win streak going by taking Oscar to go see the new Despicable Me movie over the holiday weekend?
I am going to do everything in my power to not take my child to see that, but I do plan to recommend that as a grandma-led activity.
Yes, there you go. That's a good idea.
So I do think the box office will get our dollars, just not from me directly.
I had Charlotte's grandparents babysit her one day, and she had seen already in the theaters the Minions movie from last year, and it had become available on Peacock. And we're like, hey, why don't you guys watch the Minion movie with Grandma and Grandpa? And we came back from dinner, and they were watching it for a second time because I guess they didn't know how to change the apps. And they were hysterical. They love the Minions. That's my experience now, that my tastes might not align with my parents or with Kim's parents' tastes. But you know what? Those animated kid movies are like correct pacing for little kids and for grandparents. It's a language they have in common, apparently.
That's right.
I did like one of the Despicable Me movies. We used to own it because when she was very young, she liked watching that one and watched it many times. But I don't know if I want to see this, whatever this is, the fourth version of this at this point. I'm not sure I want to see yet again another one of these.
Yeah, I'm not one that's big on animated movies to begin with, honestly, but certain ones I can get on board for. I've seen a couple this year already, so I feel like it's time to turn it over to Grandma.
But that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is The Bear, Season 3, which just premiered, and I did publish an episode. I was planning to not cover the entire series, but as I said in that recap episode, I just kept talking. And before I knew it, I was at episode 10. I got all the way to the end. And I also watched the whole thing in two binges. I watched about more than half the show the first night and then the remainder the following day and over the course of that night, and then recorded the episode. And I had some pretty mixed reactions. I feel to some extent the show is probably, from the little bit of internet research I've done and people's reactions to it, there is more of a mixed reaction here, critically as well as among fans. So my first question to you, Sona, was, did you finish the whole thing? Did you binge the whole show?
I
season?
finished the whole thing. I made sure
Wow.
to finish the whole thing. I centered
Wow.
my whole life around finishing the whole thing.
So then my follow-up to that is, since you were pushing yourself through, I'm sure, just for time constraints, what did you feel about it as far as comparing it to your previous experiences, previous seasons?
I still really enjoyed this, but I also think that, as I've mentioned before, I feel like the nature of having a TV series that continues over multiple seasons
Yeah.
is something that is very challenging. And I don't think it's a reasonable expectation that every season is going to be as good as every other season, or
Right.
the same intensity or the same depth or any of it as every other season. I think that challenge is one that is impossible to meet. So I am probably more forgiving of certain things than other people might be. But I felt like there was a lot to like. I felt like there was a lot of depth to it. I felt like there were some episodes that were really very touching. I felt like it was still beautiful to watch. I still enjoyed a lot of the dialogue. To me, I probably objectively would say it's not as good as season two,
Right.
but I don't feel like, oh, it's jumped the shark, or like, oh, this is completely fallen off. No, I don't have that sense at all.
Yeah, I have two main critiques, but I'll save them once we get some of the basics out of the way. I don't want to put my thumb on the scale too much, but I did enjoy it overall, definitely. Let's walk through it a little bit. Let's not spoil the end of the season. I think people are probably going to watch this a little more slowly. Although I know many people have binged the whole thing like immediately, even quicker than I did. But I think most people will, just given the realities of life, probably going to take a little bit of time getting through this. Let's only spoil like the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then we'll have like a moment where the audience can step away, and then we'll a lot of the critique I have, I think, is towards the end of the season, so we can wait to get to that. I texted you immediately when I started watching the show. As soon as it became available, I watched the premiere episode, probably within an hour of it dropping, because I was so much anticipating it. And I was texting you through my experience of that first episode, which absolutely knocked my socks off. What did you think of the premiere episode here?
I thought it was great. I also thought I probably had forgotten how intense this show can be sometimes. First of all, so I was a little bit like, whoa, I forgot how much they throw at you. And I think, let me ask you, do you remember them doing as much playing with the timelines in prior seasons?
No, I think that is something that is very unique to this episode.
So I think it took me a little bit to get my
Yes.
head adjusted to what I was seeing, right?
Right,
Because
right.
I expected to see us just picking up where we left off.
Mm-hmm.
And so the time shift, I felt like I was a little bit dull. Like it took me longer than it should have to grasp what all I was seeing and where it related to today. But once I did, I really enjoyed that ride of how that montage was put together.
I agree that I was confused as to, for example, we see that wound on Carmi's hand, which I don't believe we've seen earlier in the show.
Right.
And it does get explained over the course of the season, but I don't think we've seen it before or it's been referenced in any way. So I do think it's new here. But at the same time, I wasn't sure exactly where we were in time, even if I knew what they were doing, where they were showing us the immediate aftermath. And maybe that's a good guideline for everybody. The Bear has very simple synopses on their episodes, and this one was today and everything led up to it. I think that's basically all it was. So it was an interesting primer for me to read that before I started watching the episode on Disney Plus, because it did set up that, oh, I see what they're doing there. Like it gave me the context that this is him with that wound on his hand, reflecting on the whole journey up until this point. And what I really loved about it, even though it is very disorienting, I agree. But eventually you get into the flow of it. I like the fact that it's very frenetic at some points, but then it luxuriates in these moments where it really puts you in his headspace, how he is finding himself in the cooking, in these experiences. So I love that it really took us on a journey, his emotional journey. And I thought it was excellent, really impressed by this, to be this first episode of the season 3, because it's a very generous thing to do to the audience, that at a very high level artistically giving you something that the show hasn't done before, but at the same time catching you up. You see all the characters from the entire show. Oh yeah, that's right, that's his brother, that's his mom, that's the relationship they have with each other, these are all the restaurants he's worked at. It's like we have a summation in some ways of everything we've seen up until now. So it is almost like a previously on, done at a artistically exceptional level.
Yes, but I'm not going to lie. I think some of these episodes could have used a previously on.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate that they give the audience credit, but just as a matter of time passing and people having lives.
Yes.
I think the expectation was set a little bit high on some of the callbacks, that you would remember what they were referencing.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest, a couple of times I did go online, which I hardly ever do.
Who is that?
Yeah. And there were some things with a very fine point on them there that I would not have picked up had someone online not pointed it out to me.
Do you have an example, or is that too late in the show that we want to wait?
It's too late in the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll circle back to that then. Yeah, in my experience after that, I was like, wow, I cannot believe how I just had my socks knocked off of me off of episode 1. I found episode 2 to be almost the opposite. I felt like it was straining. Let's try to get some of that frantic comedic energy from season 1, which honestly, I never really loved in season 1 anyway, but now it really felt like it was forced. And it was interesting because it's like they're trying to accommodate both audiences. Yeah. In my solo recap of this earlier, I mentioned that it was like the restaurant itself, where they're trying to be this high end, but they're also trying to make those beef sandwiches still. And this was the beef sandwich, and it doesn't really want to be making beef sandwiches anymore. This was a little rough for me, but then I was really impressed with episode 3, which then shows you not only this incredible pressure cooker of this first month that the restaurant is under, but also that Carmi is pushing these people to a breaking point, basically. So what did you think about those next couple episodes?
First of all, I love that you're giving me credit for being able to differentiate what happened in episode 2 and what happened in episode 3, considering I just sat and stared at the TV for like 4 hours straight.
Just to set that context, that dividing line, episode 2 was really like basically the big standout moment of episode 2, if you want to call it that, is that Carmi and Richie are just going at it for a really long time.
Okay.
And episode 3 is, again, almost just like a pure montage of the grind, the repetition.
Yes. Which one was the one where they're showing the book every day, Monday, June 22nd, whatever it may be. I'm making up the date. Tuesday, June 23rd, as they're going through. Was that episode 2 or episode
That's
3?
episode 3, which is called, I think it's called 1 month. And it basically is 30 days of them just, as if it's not bad enough to open a new restaurant, he's changing the menu every day. Like all those crazy OCD non-negotiables supposedly that he has.
Insanity. Once a week, I could totally see that every day just seems logistically a nightmare. But that's neither here nor there. I do think the line is very blurred between these 2 episodes, because I think it is trying to keep that frenetic energy going. Yeah. And it reminded me of a girlfriend who was talking about her, I think at that point, pre-teenage daughter and her friends, and said, it's like a bunch of swans. Like you look on the surface and everything is calm and peaceful and they're so pretty. But underneath, they're all paddling like crazy to keep up with each other and do the right thing and be the right place and wear the right clothes. And it reminded me of that idea of the front of house trying to look so smooth and put together. And then in the back, it's just total chaos of people just trying to keep it together. So I did enjoy these, though. I think from what I understand, I have never worked in a restaurant, but from what I understand, it is like a very specific culture, right? Mm-hmm. There are books about it. There are other movies, TV shows about it. And there's like a specific camaraderie that comes from being in the weeds together, from like getting slammed, from being there after hours, from having smoke breaks, all of that. And I felt like it did do a good job of conveying that kind of chaotic misery that bonds them together.
Yeah, I agree. And it is the metaphor of a family, a messy family in this case. I do find it interesting here that even though it is a very high stress job, it is a very tense circumstance to work in these industries, I do think that they do, maybe in this season more than ever before, show us the contrast that even in these other places that supposedly are dysfunctional, when you see them prepping for the day, or you see the parallel between
the newspaper.
It is nowhere near as chaotic as theirs is. Like, they are truly dysfunctional. And Carmi, and maybe because of his upbringing and maybe this pressure he puts on himself, rather than saying, let's get these people, who a lot of these people have never performed at this level, and they're just getting there and are really proud of what they've achieved, instead of letting them settle in, he's like, okay, now I'm going to take this from you are functionally an elite restaurant to we are going to be a Michelin star restaurant.
Yes.
1 month from now, we're going to be there. Can these people do this? You're expecting a lot.
Especially when you're changing the menu every day.
Every day. Yeah. Just do a seasonal menu and then ramp your way up to a daily menu. Like you said, even a weekly menu, just when you, and maybe we'll just jump straight to this, but I didn't love episode 4 that much. That's a lot of just, I feel like they're trying to lay out the stakes of the season. I can't really differentiate this one, to be honest, if you're asking for more details, other than one thing that I'll point out in just a minute. But then episode 5 is when the computer shows up and starts to break down the budget here. And it's absolutely the case that he's buying, think about it, he's buying equipment to make a recipe, but it's not like their staple recipe. It's for that one day. Like, think about how absolutely inefficient this is.
Absolutely.
And that gets us pretty much to the midway point of the season. Sona, I'm going to just tell the audience if they want to step away and come back when they finish the season. I'd say we could talk about the back half of the season now. Sure. A mixed bag for me, but I still think these highs are really high. I think most shows do not even try to achieve that. So yeah, it's not as perfect as season 2, but this is still really terrific show. If anybody's dissuaded by some of this really negative internet backlash for some reason, I'd say watch it yourself. Don't binge it. Maybe that's not the right way to watch it. Take little breaks. Watch 3 episodes at a time, for example. Still a lot to admire here.
I absolutely agree.
And we can go full spoilers now. I think episode 6 is really excellent. This is the one where we see the entire backstory, really a standout episode. It's called Napkins. And this is when we see Tina's backstory, which I think is definitely one of the best.
Amazing.
And just showing a side of New York that we never see, to be honest.
Of Chicago.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Chicago.
Amazing. And again, I think because it was such a departure from the episodes before it, my very slow self for a minute was like, wait, she's been holding down a full-time job the entire time?
I think that's intentional. Once again, I thought the same thing. I'm like, wait, she's been doing 2 jobs? This lady's crazy.
How is she making it to the farmer's market every day?
How was she doing the training? How was she doing the culinary training last season if she was working a full-time job?
So yes, again, it took me a few minutes to catch up there. But once I did, I really appreciated it. I think also this probably really resonated for a certain demographic of people who had parents that were just getting up and going through the routine every day just for the sake of building a better life for the next generation. They're just so dedicated to it and so hardworking. And I think a lot of us grew up witnessing that kind of thing from our parents. So I think it really resonated on that level. For me, we haven't gotten there yet. I was much more emotionally moved by the ice chips episode, but we're not there yet. But I thought that's a little early. I thought it was beautifully done. And I loved how they showed Mikey, right? Mikey or Mike? Her interactions with him, I think conveyed in a way that I hadn't seen before in the flashbacks of why everybody loved him so much, how charming he was. And I think you have those everyday interactions with someone that take you by surprise and how deep they are and how fast you can relate to someone that you don't expect to really have much in common with, right? And you just pick up a conversation randomly and it stays with you for a while afterwards. For her, it was life-changing. But I just thought they did a really great job with that character in this episode of explaining why everybody felt the way they did about him and what a loss it was to them and how possibly surprising it was to some people who didn't realize what he was struggling with. And all of that I thought was really beautifully done in her exchange with him about the top 5 or 6 horrible things that have happened today.
My father was a construction worker. My mom was a seamstress. And almost all of our friends, our social circle were just working class people. And to your point, their expectation was, I have a job, I can put food on a table. That is a success. And I very much like the fact that in this particular case, they make it pretty clear that they actually do need her to work. They need the extra money. But she calls out the fact that that actor, I forget his name, but from Dexter, by the way, right? Her husband, everybody has to be a recognizable actor on the show. Recently.
Her real life husband, I read online.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Comments.
Wow.
Yes.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I did not realize that. They have nice chemistry together too. But just the fact that even if it wasn't for the money, she just wants to feel like she is part of society and contributing in some way. And yeah, I love this. I love we so rarely see these type of working class stories, and it's a very authentic feeling. And another thing I wanted to mention is a very smart, I think, double duty in this episode, not only giving us this additional context for Tina and telling this very different type of story than we're used to seeing in these type of shows. But the whole Mikey thing, I think, is great because after season 1, we think, wow, he's this charismatic guy. And then he killed himself and no one knows why. And then in season 2, we're like, wow, he's a loser. He was an addict. He was a gambler. And that was his problem. And it's not until now that we realize, no, it was his dad's restaurant. His dad abandons this thing behind. He, who didn't really have any kind of direction in life, ends up just inheriting this. And now, of course, the whole family expects he's the big man on campus. Everybody loves him. Everybody loves the restaurant. And meanwhile, he, speaking of like that swan analogy, is frantically trying to keep things afloat and until he couldn't do it anymore, right? And he hands this over to Carmi to try to save it once again. But it makes him a very tragic figure, which I had not seen him as that earlier on. Maybe he had issues with depression, maybe he had issues with addiction, but I didn't really see him as a tragic figure. But imagining this guy trying to save this restaurant for his family and then seeing no other way out is a really sad turn in our understanding of him.
I was really grateful for that additional character development for him because it really is his death that sets all of this into motion. And I thought it was great how he interacted with them. I also liked seeing what that sandwich shop was like again, pre-Carmi. And that chaos, they were all having fun in their way and talking back to the customers and all of that. And like, it was a fun scene, I thought, when they showed what was happening at the counter and when they give Tina the free sandwiches. And it showed the dimension of those characters. I thought it was very heartwarming, that whole sequence in the sandwich shop.
Something I forgot to call out earlier in those episodes that we skirted there, episode 4 and 5, which I felt blurred together. And there was a lot of things in there that were awkward. I want to call out 2 things, one positive, one negative. The positive one I want to call out is one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is that Marcus is dealing with the death of his mother.
Yes.
Which, of course, also makes people think about the death of Mikey earlier on. But I just want to call out this actor, Lionel Boyce, who I only have ever seen in music videos for some of the Tyler, the Creator videos from like 10 years ago, probably. And this actor, in some ways, just like this chef, I feel every year they expect more of him performance-wise, and he keeps upping his game because he's giving a much more texture to Marcus here. Yeah, really impressed by him as a performer.
I agree.
On the negative side, in season 1, these actors were people that are either like that guy, like, oh, I remember that guy from 10 years ago, or I've seen her on TV before. But pretty much in a way, this staff is being introduced to us, the audience, for the first time. We don't know hardly any of these people other than the star, obviously, who's famous from Shameless, but basically only from that. So if you haven't seen that show, he's new to you also. But that's pretty much it. And then we see his extended family. And not only that, we see everybody else who's a secondary or tertiary character here. And they're all famous. Do we need to have John Cena be one of the facts?
That was
Do we need,
a bit much.
Too much. They're all, Josh Hartnett is the new fiance. What is going on? Like, everybody here is famous.
Wow,
Why?
I did not pick up that was Josh Hartnett at all. Interesting. Okay.
I just saw him in Oppenheimer, so I did recognize him pretty.
Mhm.
He's also the star of the new M. Night Shyamalan movie, so he's having a big comeback for him this year.
Good for him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's excellent in Oppenheimer, by the way. Small part, but excellent. But yeah, do we need to have famous people in all of these secondary roles?
Yeah, I agree. Like a stunt casting thing that is unnecessary.
Continuously, yeah. And I also want to bring up Marcus, because another thing that gets introduced here is that Marcus starts looking at Carmi's journals, his diaries, with these beautiful pictures inside of them. And we see how he's been developing this over time, and it's an inspiration for Marcus. Then after that episode, Napkins, the one that's centered around Tina, we get to this episode called Legacy. And I really love what they talk about, the concept of legacy, that each one of these restaurateurs is trying to create some kind of cultural legacy. And it made me think about this whole entire show is really about Carmi looking for a parental figure in some way, right? And then, of course, the legacy that we leave behind in the work that we do, in the things that we create, and of course, and the families that we raise. And I think that's a big theme here in this season, because you think about how he is, and we'll get to it in the finale, but he has to confront all these different versions of how to be a boss, how to be a parent, how to be a leader. And I think that's introduced even more so here in this particular episode, which once again is clunky. They try to shove a lot of things in there, but I do think that at its strongest, it is interesting to have this theme here of being the good parent and the bad parent, right? Sometimes he is this guiding force, helping Marcus, sharing this very intimate thing with him and talking to him about his experiences. And then, of course, he can also be echoing the David character, the Joel McHale character, another famous face here, obviously, the abusive boss that he has, that he encounters again towards the end of the season. He literally quotes him at times when he is being at his most abusive with his coworkers.
I think also there was a theme, which I just finished this last night at, I don't know, like 10 o'clock. So I haven't given it enough thought yet, but I actually watched a few episodes with my husband. This was another, as a tangent. Apparently this was a show we watched together. I didn't recall that. So I finished half this season without him. And so a lot of yesterday was spent on the resentment of me watching half the season without him. But he did deign to join me for a few of the later episodes, which was kind of him. And he pointed this out. There's something going on about relationships with women for a lot of the men here, whether parental figure or romantic relationship, right? Because throughout, Carmi is obsessing on what has happened with Claire and trying to push it down, and it keeps coming back up. We see Richie with his ex-wife. We have Marcus has lost his mother. We have the Ice Chips episode with D, and D is like a looming figure throughout the season. I feel like there was a lot about letting go of relationships, rekindling relationships, when to reach out to people. A lot of that was recurring throughout.
I think that all ties in with that broader concept of looking for some kind of parental figure. And that goes for the romantic relationships also, right? You think about how most of these women we're talking about are in a way mothers themselves, or are nurturing in some way to these men. And Carmi, for example, is rejecting that side of himself because he thinks it's distraction from these other things he's trying to achieve. And then that's a question too. My wife is just catching up season 2, and I rewatched that season, that episode where Marcus goes to Copenhagen with her. There's that whole conversation that's had where the other chef says to him that he realized over time that it doesn't matter how good your technique is if you don't have a point of view. And the only way you get those experiences, that you know what the world is about and you experiment with flavor or whatever else, is to have those experiences. Carmi is so still caught in this paradigm where he has to be on point and he has to be referencing other restaurants' food, other chefs. He's so caught up in that he's not necessarily having his own opinion, he's having his own point of view, which is also a tension, by the way, to bring it back to the plot of the show, that he's having with Sidney, because he's offered to make her a partner in the restaurant. That's obviously a huge plot here in the season. And she is reluctant to sign this thing. It's the deal is she actually gets another offer. We could talk about that briefly too, from another chef who's planning on starting his own restaurant, who's funded. And she's in the midst of this, and she's looking at Carmi and speaking to his relationship with women. He says he needs her. She has that passion, that life experience, that more naive point of view that he wants to integrate into his cuisine. And I think conceptually he wants that, but he's not actually doing that, right? He rejects her modifications to the recipes. He goes into full control mode and keeps telling her, no, he needs her. But then she's thinking, does he? Like, is that legitimate? And I think that's a big theme here too. Not only his relationship with Claire, but his relationship with Sidney as well.
Poor Sidney is just getting the short end of the stick all around, it feels like.
Speaking of moms, Sidney, of course, her relationship with her dad, a very positive one, although he maybe clings to her a little too much. And of course, her absent mother is obviously another big theme here as well.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, so then you can run with ice chips, by the way. This episode was really tough for me. I found that maybe because I watched this in the binge, it really grated on me. The Jamie Lee Curtis character, Didi, is so much and intentional. She's not annoying in an everybody loves Raymond, like laugh at the character type situation. She's annoying how people are actually annoying. I wanted to fast forward through these scenes because it is giving you...
You felt triggered by it.
Oh, I was triggered. Yes, triggered for sure. But then the show is able to make that pivot. There's some really excellent scenes towards the end. Once again, the show is very intentional in what it's provoking in me, even if it is negative feelings. But it probably didn't hit me exactly the way it was supposed to, but I have a feeling that it probably hit you differently. Go ahead.
As I was watching it, I felt like this could either really completely resonate for someone, or it could completely be off key for them. And if they have no point of relationship, hey, if you have a healthy relationship with your mom, this probably does nothing for you whatsoever, right? I think this is very dependent on being able to see a part of yourself, either in sugar or in the mom, or being able to identify with that dynamic. And I think there is a point where it can be triggering. And I felt like the entire episode, I was on thin ice thinking, oh my God, is she just going to take it over the top, and whatever nice moment that they could be having, she's going to ruin it, right? Because that's her. That's her nature. That's her impulse. Is she going to be able to resist making it about herself, or whatever it may be that we saw in the Christmas episode?
Right.
I did have to push that down because I really was very edgy about that. But as a person who I think has a complicated dynamic with my parents, I just thought this was really beautifully written, beautifully acted, about the baggage that you carry with you and the baggage you pass on to the next generation inadvertently often, and that there is still good in the relationship and there's still love in the relationship. Even with all of that, I don't think it was very realistic, but I liked the foreshadowing of Sugar trying to resolve all my childhood baggage before this baby comes.
Right.
But she's trying to do it single-handedly, which I have been in that position as well. I understand. But you got to get either a therapist involved or somebody. You cannot, when it's that deep, you can't do it on your own. So I get her sentiment, but I also was like, yeah, it's impossible if you're not going to involve a therapist or somebody else in working this out. But I liked the way it showed her trying to work through that in these final moments as she's literally having contractions while this baby is coming, and she feels this need to unburden all of it to her mother, saying, this is what I grew up with. Don't you understand how hard it was for me? And what I really loved was the recognition from her mom. Yes, I did do that. And yes, I do have this baggage. And the recognition, I'm trying to let it go, knowing that people are flawed and it's not that easy. You don't make this, you just wake up one day, I've let the baggage go and you're done. But trying counts for a lot. And the owning of, yes, I did do those things. Yes, I do have that baggage is so much more than many people ever get from their parents.
True. Yeah.
So I thought it was beautiful, that moment between them, and showing that even with all that baggage, the mom can still provide comfort to her during this time, even though she came in with her original, what are you talking about? You don't want an epidural. You're crazy. This is insane.
Right.
The acceptance of letting her daughter make her own decisions at this really critical time and respecting those decisions. All of that. I thought it was beautiful. I really did.
Yeah, I thought the episode landed. I was uneven on the episode in general, and I felt it was a little too long. But I thought
it was long.
The final sequence, that moment where that pivot comes, and maybe you have to earn it for that to work, to be honest. So that might be my own limitation. But yeah, I thought that was really great. And for her mom to acknowledge, that sounds terrible when she says to her that the way she grew up.
Yeah.
I thought that was something.
The final scene between Sugar and her mom, where Pete finally arrives, and she just quietly takes her things and walks away to the waiting room. I just thought it just showed the possibility for so much growth in that character to gracefully exit without any fanfare, to let her daughter focus on being with her husband at this time. I cried. The whole thing I thought was just so beautifully done. I cried.
Yeah, and for someone who's not, I didn't cry. I was not as moved by this as you were. But at the same time, for someone who really finds the Didi character really annoying and a little annoyed that they had to do the stunt casting with someone who's so famous and recognizable, all of that rubs me the wrong way with this character in general. But I do agree that I liked how that interaction with Sugar ends. I liked Pete showing up. I liked Pete talking to her afterwards and her not making it about herself. And then the facts also, who I love these guys in general, these non-professional actors, but it could be too much. I think they put too much of them in this season. That really,
I agree with that completely.
They're leaning way too hard trying to make them into the comic relief in a way. But I love their interactions with her. It really felt like these were just people who've known her their whole entire lives.
Yes.
They have all this baggage. And she's just like one of the moms in the neighborhood who used to feed them when they came over. And there's this kind of comfort between them all, which is really sweet.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And then we get down to the last two episodes. Episode 9 is called Apologies. This one was a little annoying to me too. Some of the stylistics here are getting repetitive, in my opinion. This thing where you have these screeching strings on the score and it's blending together with the Claire music, which is this Strange Frequencies, this REM song, which is a really great song. Mm-hmm. But the way they're trying to like put you in Carmi's head by going back and forth, and he's practicing this apology. This is a real big stylistic swing. And maybe I shouldn't have binged this show and taken a little break. This episode was, I was needing the show to go in a different mode at this point, a little bit for me. Although still big fan of the season overall. This episode may be the one that worked the least well for me. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. It felt, was this the next to last episode?
This is next to last, yeah. And another apology here too is when we have a little bit of that conversation between, I think this is in the same episode, I might even be getting this wrong, but I think it's when Richie is talking to his ex-wife, whether he should go to the wedding or not. And that whole interaction, which was nice, but I also felt it was redundant. Didn't we already do this scene? It was a lot of this didn't work.
Maybe I've just grown used to the structure of a penultimate episode, almost being more than the finale and more tension and more drama and just really setting up almost like a crescendo, a high point to then step down a half step for the finale.
Yes.
I don't feel like it did that. And maybe it's just because I've become so used to that structure. But as a next to last episode, it felt kind of like filler.
Yes, I feel exactly the same way. I felt like it was just a lot of we need to set things up. And this is what I think is a limitation for this season of the show. And I understand there's huge expectations on this show when it started with almost nothing. Once again, I think that's a big metaphor for the show versus the restaurant. It's just a sandwich shop. And then it keeps upping its game. And oh my God, I can't believe how great season 2 was. Can't believe how great that little restaurant's turned into. And now there's all these expectations, all these Emmys that the show has won, etc., that now everybody's waiting for this thing to save television or whatever. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is just them straining under this. But I would say structurally, it felt like with season 2, you have the key episodes and then you had those filler episodes. And for me, some of those filler episodes were my favorite episodes. I'm like, wow, to take an episode that is really just biding time and give you this really rich experience of filling in the blanks so beautifully, honestly. I think here you do have those really strong episodes. And then the in-between episodes, I really feel them working to set up the stakes and introduce new plot points. And the characters, because of that, the characters aren't interacting with each other enough. They're all off on their own, but not in a shared way, like not like season 2, where they had this very clear goal of all coming back together to make the restaurant open, obviously. So a very clear target. Here, they're all doing these side quests, but just to fill out the plot of the show, because or introduce new conflicts, because the restaurant's open now, and there's not a clear endpoint for the season. And we'll get to the finale, because I think that's also a little bit lacking here as well. But yeah, all those things were problematic for me in episode 9. And like you said, it feels like we're getting filler. It's not even filler, because there's a lot of stuff that gets laid out, like the situation with Sidney, and now she has a clear job offer, but it's just more of what we've already seen throughout the season. Again, it is very weird.
Yeah.
Even that scene where he's thinking about Claire again, we've seen all this over the course of the season too. It's almost like we're setting the table one more time for the finale. And maybe that's what the purpose is here, to clean up a lot of these disparate plot lines and set the table again for the finale. And so maybe that's what the purpose is, but I felt it wasn't inelegant in the way that it did.
Right.
And then, of course, we get to the finale, which has some really great moments, but also is just full of cliffhangers. One of the big things here is that there was a restaurant review, which apparently had already been written, and they were unaware of it when that was a big deal. We found out, I guess, in episode 9, possibly even. So another important thing that happens there is Carmi has this conversation with Cicero yet again, and Cicero is saying, this review's not a knockout. I'm going to have to pull the plug on the restaurant. But then when he's back in the car talking to his accountant, this computer character, turns out that he really doesn't have the money, period. It doesn't really matter. He's just using that as an excuse. But he actually doesn't have the money to keep the restaurant afloat. And none of this is resolved, right? It literally ends on a cliffhanger. This review has come out. Cicero is calling him. The computer is calling him. He is committed to go talk to Claire again. Is he going to get back together with Claire? Everything's on a cliffhanger here at the end of season 3. How did you feel about this episode overall?
I love the idea of this get together for the closing of the restaurant with all of these famous chefs and their significance in each other's lives, because they have overlapping work histories, right? I thought that was lovely. I liked Richie being in with the other people who are doing service, because he feels more comfortable back there. I thought all of it was really great. The thing with the restaurant review, it just has been held over our heads for too long, it feels like at this point, especially with the, for lack of a better word, schizophrenic thing of, this is again where am I not focusing enough on this show where they're showing the flashes of the reviews, and some of them are good and some of them are bad.
It's very hard to read what you're even seeing there. Yes, I agree.
Yes. And then sometimes Sidney is seeing them and she's been left out of them, and are these real? Are these fictional? Okay, this requires more focus than I thought it did. I understand why it would be left on a cliffhanger, but I didn't appreciate that it was left on a cliffhanger.
Right.
I know they did a to be continued.
They literally have a to be continued. Exactly. Yes.
But just as a viewer, I was like, just nothing. Just the fact that it came out. I loved, by the way, to back up just a little bit from that review, the party scene at Sidney's apartment.
Yes,
I thought was great.
All she has is frozen waffles, I should say.
I love that. And the chef saying, I can work with that.
Exactly.
I loved all of that. You know what? I felt like that would have been a good penultimate episode.
Yes, I agree. And then have some kind of closure on the end. Even if it sounded like, let's say, for example, that Cicero tells them we got to shut down the restaurant, and then somehow they keep it afloat next season. That's fine. Then we could still be like, oh my God, are they really going to shut down the Bear? They've just barely opened. That's a cliffhanger, sure, but it still gives a finality to this storyline to some extent. A couple of points there. I want to talk more about the substance of the last episode. But before then, I think might be an issue with this. They shot season 3 and season 4 at the same time. Season 4, just a little production notes here. The season 4 will be the final season, so they are going to wrap things up. And I do wonder if that is part of the problem we're seeing here, where they wrote this as season 3 and season 4 at the same time, then feeling like we are just writing a season of show and then ending it, because I've seen this in the past where whether it's a movie where they shoot two stories at the same time or a season like this, like when they had, I guess they did a good job of this, Better Call Saul, they shot it all at once, but they split it in half afterwards. So I think they had a very strong mid-season finale there. So that's not a good example, actually. But yeah, I think I do wonder if part of this is the fact that they wrote it and they're leaving it that way, but are aware of what they're doing, right? Because the other seasons didn't end on to be continued. This is literally saying like this story's not complete, which does feel a little too open-ended, I feel. Back to the substance of the episode, though, I do love Olivia, just the kind of set context there too. Olivia Colman's restaurant Ever, which of course is this idealized, kinder, gentler way to run a restaurant. It is this oasis of peace after a really chaotic season 2 episode when Richie goes to work there. And you assume that Carmi also had that experience after working at David in New York City and then coming back to Chicago and working at Ever at Olivia Colman's restaurant. And very importantly here, once again, talking about good parent, bad parent, you have the Olivia Colman character and the Joel McHale character in the same room together. And we have these two very contradictory conversations. When we have this conversation with Chef Terry, she's talking about how she has achieved so much and she's been working her whole entire life. She got everything she wanted. She loves what she's doing, but she thinks she's done enough. And now she just wants to hang out with friends, be with her family, travel the world. And there's a question, once again, that we all have to ask ourselves, when is enough to that point? And then you have this very different point of view where Carmi is talking to David and he says, you should be thanking me. I made you what you are today. And he might be right to some extent. Carmi, given his background, he may have needed the David experience to respond to the Terry experience, right? So what do you think the show's trying to say there? And how do you feel about this whole assessment that maybe he needed David to be the abusive parent to drive him in the first place?
This reminds me of something that does come up in therapy a lot. All of these things can be true.
Exactly.
Right?
All of these. I agree.
So yeah, there probably is something to that. And there also probably is something to Carmi saying, you gave me post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And that's what's unfortunate about human nature, I think. Sometimes people are driven by different things because of their own makeup, because of their childhood experiences. We respond in different ways to different stimuli. And I think one person might have one weekend said, this is abusive. I'm not here for this. I'm out. And another person is going to say, okay, so I'm going to prove it, right? That I can earn your approval. Listen, I have been both those people at different times in my life, right? Mm-hmm. The me from 20 years ago would respond one way. The me from last year would respond a different way. So I think it was an interesting and valid point that as awful as it may have been, that doesn't mean there wasn't something gained there. Unfortunately, right? It would be nice if life was so cut and dry that only kinder, gentler methods were productive and always succeeded. But life is a lot more complicated than that as far as what drives people.
I think it also matters on the person, right? Like you think about Carmi's personality and his background, he probably needed someone to crack the whip to push him as hard as they did. Whereas some people, I think you push them too hard, they are not going to respond well at all to that. So it's not only that all things can be true at the same time, like you mentioned, it's also the fact that what works for one person may not work for somebody else, right? Like some people need to have a hard lesson and some people do not. Some people learn their lessons pretty readily. If anything, the kinder, gentler approach is the best approach, right? It is interesting that the show acknowledges that. But I do think that the show does want Carmi to realize that just because it worked for him, he does not now have to model that for his staff, right? He needs to somehow merge these things more cleanly into his own personality.
I've never been a coach, but I think this is something about coaching, right? Is seeing each person for who they are and what they're going to respond to. And the tough love that works on one person is not going to work on the next. And what we see throughout this season is that this is not working for Sidney.
Right.
And I think what he's not realizing is that Sidney has other options. It's one thing when if a person really needs that under their belt, so they really have no choice but to grit their teeth and get through it.
Right.
But Sidney, at this point, he's not seeing, has accomplished enough and made her own reputation, whether he's recognizing it or not, that she does have other options and she doesn't have to stick around for this abusive behavior. I am hoping that they specifically made a point of echoing those words that he has said to Sidney in his flashbacks. And at the table, the chefs discussing how awful some people are to work for and that they it's going to be a net negative in the end when you are that way. I'm hoping that all of that was set up for him to have that realization about what he is inadvertently creating. Because I don't see why they would set it up that way otherwise, to be honest. But it remains to be seen if it will be in time, right?
Exactly. I think that there's this all or nothing attitude that Carmi has. They're trying to correct in him to some extent. And there is that saying something and doing it is different with his relationship for Sidney, for example, but also the way he treated Claire. Last season, he did take his eye off the ball, right? He could have easily called somebody up to fix the refrigerator door. That's just one metaphor here. And everybody did step up their game, and he could have been happy about that and said, I need to correct myself. But his answer to that is, I need to be 100% dedicated to this and have nothing else in my life, which of course shouldn't be the lesson. He needs to be able to do these things, not 150% perhaps, maybe 80%, because these people have stepped up their game. And then you can have your personal life, but that doesn't mean you go out to a party and disappear for 48 hours and the restaurant is still just going to open on time, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be all of one thing or all of the other. And that's something that he still needs to learn. Couple of things I want to call out, and of course, anything you might want to add too. I find it very funny that Cicero is like, hey, I'm not crazy here, right? This restaurant's full every single night and we're making no money, because it's like the more they sell, the more money they lose. And then, of course, going back to the metaphor of the show, trying to be this high-end restaurant and a sandwich shop at the same time, he goes, we'll pay everybody's salary from the sandwich shop because the sandwich shop is still booming.
Yes.
And once again, going back to focusing on the right things, I think that maybe this is a direction that the show is trying to point for next season, is looking at Ibrahim as an example where he's so burnt out that he seems like he's about to quit his job, even though he doesn't necessarily have other options. And then when it's like, look, you make the sandwiches. We have a system for getting the sandwiches out. So now more sandwiches are going out the door. And Ibrahim, once again, is loving what he's doing, which is very important. Do the thing that you can do and don't try to do all the jobs. And I think that is maybe a lesson that the show needs to learn as well.
Back to Tina for just 1 second.
Yeah.
Once I realized in the Tina episode what the timeline was, that makes it even more hysterical that at the beginning of this show, she's pretending she doesn't speak English.
Yes, that's true.
Because she's so annoyed at the whole situation. I thought it was like somewhat believable that she's not a native speaker and she, whatever, in that first couple of episodes. But seeing what her life was before this makes it really hysterical that she thinks she's going to pretend she doesn't speak English.
I like that they have the theme here, by the way, that she did not like Sidney, this like young interloper coming into her.
Yes.
I do like that they made that a theme of this as well. She hated Sidney. And then when she earns Sidney's respect, she wants to appease her to some extent. And you see it here too, where she's going on all these interviews and she's like, these young people have no idea how lucky they have it, which of course I think about this all the time. I have the same conflicted emotion where I simultaneously am annoyed that these kids do not know what they do not know. And then I admire their absolute brazenness because they're so dumb right now. I wish I was that dumb to some extent because you only take chances when you don't know what you're stepping into oftentimes.
It's true. It's true.
All right. So a couple of things, Sona. One is I have a little recommendation for anybody who I just watched this intentionally because of the bear. There's a movie that came out last year called Perfect Days. Have you ever heard of this?
I haven't.
It's available on Hulu. It is a Japanese movie. It was nominated for Best International Film, directed by a German director, Wim Wenders, a very famous director who directed Wings of Desire. One example, he did the Buena Vista Social Club documentary. the movies I would name, he did The American Friend, which is actually a Tom Ripley adaptation from the 1970s. He's been making movies for a very long time and still making great films now. He's had a very interesting career. And the actor won Best Actor at the Cannes Film Festival. This is almost a silent performance. It is a man later in life, probably late 50s, I would guess, who cleans toilets. I don't know if you guys know this, but anybody who's not aware of this, Japan has a toilet culture. Like they have these very beautiful public toilets. And that's what he does. He goes and he cleans toilets for a living. And he is very dedicated to his craft, believe it or not, very impeccable with everything he does. You see his coworkers do not take things as seriously as he does. He has a routine. You see him living his life. And most importantly, in this nearly silent performance, he is appreciating the little details, even in the routine of his life, doing the same thing over and over again, that he finds these little moments of grace every single day. And it was like really life affirming. It's so beautiful. It does get more complicated as time goes on. He does have to eventually interact with the outside world. His sister comes to visit with him, and it's a real pivot point in the movie. But it is this really beautiful film about the merits of work and how these invisible people in society actually have this value. I think that goes to back of the house restaurant workers as well. And this is a really beautiful movie, beautifully photographed in Tokyo. If you just want to see lots of different locales within Tokyo, he goes to all these different toilets and all these beautiful parks and all these different locations in the city. So it's just a travel log of Tokyo. I believe Wim Wenders moved to Tokyo for a period of time, and that's when he came up with this idea of this. He actually wrote the screenplay. He and the actor wrote the screenplay together. So it's really a beautiful film. I think in a lot of ways, it parallels a lot of the themes in The Bear. And that's called Perfect Days. And it's available on Hulu, so anybody can watch it. If you don't like reading a lot of subtitles, there's not a lot of subtitles. This is like almost a Charlie Chaplin-like performance by this actor who really gives an incredible performance. Amazing face he has, very expressive face. I would highly recommend this, Sona, even if you're not really into foreign films. You could put this on. It's almost like ASMR movie. You just like look up and be like, oh, look at these beautiful trees. Oh, look at it. So I do recommend it as just a beautiful story, a very simple and beautiful. And without any of the chaos, just the more meditative moments of it's like the movie, it's like the episode Forks for 2 hours, which, hey, for me, that's my sweet spot. One more thing I wanted to mention is, we will be catching up on the latest episode of Presumed Innocent this week.
Yes.
And Sona, we will record about it somewhere during the holiday, perhaps. What are your holiday plans?
I don't have any holiday plans. How about you?
Oh, look at this. That we could definitely record. Terrific.
The fireworks are on the west side this year. I don't even have that.
Okay, great. So I will talk to you then. And if not, enjoy the holiday. Don't go see the Minions if you don't have to.
You too.
All right. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.